Well, there it is. Quite literally, the end of an era. And honestly, I'm glad I took some time instead of just immediately pumping out the review of Arcane's finale. Because the critique it got was quite simple. Mainly, there were two things everyone pointed out. On one side, there are a lot of storylines that you could feel were pushed forward a little bit too quickly. And even now, I still believe that. I think one more season could have brought everything closer to perfection, but you need to realize you can't just inflate the series without also giving it more payoffs. So truth be told, in order to perfectly hit their beats, Riot had to go a bit faster. Especially since now they also confirmed they wanna explore other regions for their stories too. So the pace almost feels like a necessary evil. But on the other side, there was the other big criticism. And it was all based on something that later got shut down. Simply said, everyone agreed that Arcane is simply an amazing series if you look at it as an isolated thing. The issue is, it is not an isolated thing. Arcane is connected to an entire universe that functions like a machine. And the moment you start introducing bigger retcons and changes, how much can we trust that the machine is gonna be consistent? You see, during these reviews I always start with a spoiler-free section. But I think this time we don't really have to. I'm pretty sure everyone has already seen Act 3. And if you haven't, go watch it. You won't regret it. Also, you are probably already paying for Netflix. So now, we can just dive into the meaty part. As I said, the one big criticism Arcane got is that in order for them to pull off their awesome story, they had to change a lot around their champions. And the issue here is that because everything in this universe is connected, you can't just say, hey, Hextech is now a magical crystal that's just found around the world, without also getting rid of the entire story of Camille. Meaning that to the people who love Camille, well, that character is no longer relevant. Which is why the moment people looked outside of the characters who appear in Arcane, they noticed there are a lot of inconsistencies. Orianna wasn't built using mechanical body parts. Hextech didn't reach the point where it could build Camille's body. Blitzcrank wasn't even mentioned. Swain's Raven appeared even though the invasion of Ionia hasn't happened yet, and so he shouldn't even have his demonic powers yet. Which we know because Singed didn't even make chemical weapons for the Noxians. Simply said, all of these is what was confusing about Arcane. It is an excellent story, but at a first glance it also had some holes. And well, that all vanished the moment we got to interview the co-creator of Arcane, where nearly every single one of these issues was addressed. So now we know that, of course, the team took every single champion into consideration when making the story of Arcane. So as an example, Camille's story will kick off after the events of Arcane. Hextech was not destroyed, someone else will pick it up later. Singed was teased to be still involved in the invasion of Ionia. That Raven that appeared might have been just the demon realm directly. And you see, all of these holes do have explanations. And that's because the team was very much aware of all of these from the start. Now, the reason why I wanted to start my review with this is because now the biggest concern people had for the future of this universe was entirely wiped out. And now we know there are more stories to come that will continue what was started here. So, with this groundwork laid out, let's now jump into the roller coaster of emotions which the finale was. A bit of a disclaimer, I did get to watch the finale live in LA with about 4,000 people in a theater. Which means, anytime a big scene happened, the audience went wild, which elevated the entire experience for me. This is especially because, you might know there was a lot of big scenes. But I'll try to be fair regardless. Also, I'll be going off of my notes which I took in the dark in the theater. So, episode 1 starts with Echo finally popping on screen after he was absent during Act 2. And he popped out in a completely different universe. where Hextech was never invented. In a way, this started what may be referred to as a convergence, a term that is often used in something like TFT, where their universe simply relies on the convergence. The idea is, while there is one universe that is the canonical timeline that serves as the big anchor, you can still peer into other universes and see what might have been different under different circumstances. Now, if you think that this is dumb and that having League as a multiverse is a horrible idea, well, this has been part of League's lore for many years. Zillion has an excellent story of him researching all the different universes to see which universe figured out how to defeat the Void. So honestly, this is nothing new. But what surprised me the most is that within the context of Arcane on its own, the entire storyline with Echo was a really good time travel story. Which is crazy because good time travel is extremely difficult to pull off. That's where most fantasy worlds are immediately gonna burn down. But here, as Vander and Milo and Clagger arrived, as Jinx was shown as powder and as Echo's emotions spiraled, this storyline not only enhanced Echo's character, but it became the core of who he is now. A boy who saw what could have been. So this was a really pleasant surprise. But of course, Heimerdinger was then introduced back too, and he was simply fine with staying in this new universe. And immediately after that, we get into a different version of this universe that is all about utter annihilation. Because Jace got into a different universe too. Here, the scene starts with all the voices in his head from Act 2 saying, "What have we done?" And once again, Jace vomits. He does it a lot in Arcane. And we got to the grand reveal that Piltover was destroyed by the Arcane. Circling back to what Jace said before. Hextech was not a blessing, it was a curse. So these two parallel universes then switch back and forth, with Echo setting up a beauty and Jace death. Although Echo learned that in this universe, Vi had died, which became the one dark twist of this universe. Fun fact here, I know that we are skipping to the end, but the reason why Vi died here is because this is a universe where Viktor never gave Jace the gem, which means he never inspired him to make Hextech. So during the first episode where they all raided Jace's lab, it might have been someone else's lab, but regardless, Jace wasn't there to knock on the door, which means that Vi didn't alert everyone to run away, and so she just stayed there and blew up. What's even crazier is that later Viktor mentions that regardless of what he does, someone eventually picks up Hextech in every universe. And so in this universe, because Echo wants to go back in time, he is the one who does that. Which is where we get the scene of him picking up the shards from the explosion. I love how this scene pays homage to Echo's original story, where he got his Hextech gem from the ruins of Viktor's lab. Except now, in Arcane, it is Jace's lab. Which is where we go back to Jace and his amazing survivor story arc. The reason why this is so powerful is because previously Jace was a suicidal character. And now he is fighting for his life with everything he got. In these scenes, I love how it is all a setup for Jace's slight insanity arc, but also it was a great setup for how creepy and unearthly the Primordians are. Especially in that one scene where they were just watching him from above. Which is where the scene goes back to Echo, who is now showing Jinx what Vi looked like in his own universe. Except here Echo says that he just imagined her like that in his dreams. Which then leads into Jinx, Heimerdinger and Echo working on their school project, I guess. This is essentially how they recreated the Hextech calibrator. And then they turned it into the Z drive, which allowed them to go back in time 4 seconds. And this all climaxed with a ship we know as a time bomb. Let me tell you, watching this with a live audience was wild. But again, all of this wasn't just fan service, even though it did serve that purpose too. Mainly, this was an excellent setup that showed us Echo's emotional bond with his own universe. Simply said, it was a tool to show him his feelings towards Powder were not blank, regardless of what reality he was in. So naturally, we then got back to Jace, who confronted himself. A husk holding the hammer, which confirmed he was the one from that one vision in Act 2. But this is also where he confronted the mage who sent him back. which is where we got the one line, "I won't fail." It's the one he kept repeating in his head before. But in the end, episode 7 ends with Echo and Heimerdinger time traveling. Heimerdinger says his line, "Never a dull moment." He disappears, likely not dying, and Echo gets taken away before Powder has a chance to interfere. This scene was very important because it seems to also set up some ground rules. It seems like one person can be in one universe only once. You can't have duplicates running around at the same time. That is why it is only after we can see our Echo being taken away that the other Echo gets his consciousness back. But then again, if you are a celestial being that controls the Arcane itself, yes, I would assume the rules are a bit different for you. More on that later. Anyway, I expected episode 7 to just start with a flashback that would explain what happened to Jace in Act 2. And instead we got a full episode on Echo's time traveling. And surprisingly, Arcane pulled it off extremely well. So if I had to rate this in isolation, it would be a really good 8 out of 10. In some parts it was a bit slow, but that's because it was a setup for the grand finale. But that takes us to episode 8. Here we start with Mel, who is now revealed to have almost celestial powers. And she immediately confronts LeBlanc, who serves as an amazing setup for a mystery. You could really feel the power radiating from that character. So I am very happy with how she was introduced, and how she essentially tried to recruit Mel into the Black Rose. After which we get to Ambessa holding a burial for Rictus. But also we got the amazing story set up for Warwick as Apex Shimmer, and Viktor now dormant in an egg as Apex Hextech. And here I absolutely loved Viktor rising to power as almost some kind of a dark lord. Seeing all of the puppets lifting up and hearing Viktor's new badass voice was awesome. But that was then quickly broken up by Vi waking up after the explosion. Which means, yep, Isha is dead. The good news is, Loris finally got some use because he's the one who broke the news to Vi. And so she learned that Caitlyn imprisoned Jinx, and so she went directly to her. And that is where we get a quick Caitlyn, Vi and Maddie crossover, where Maddie gets kicked out and she starts her jealous storyline, as well as her service to Noxus. But at the same time, Mel and Jace also get a quick reunion, and they started being set up as two powerful mages. Even though one started as an envoy from Noxus and the other one as a Piltover inventor. But together, these two would have to face none other than Viktor himself, who fought through the body of one of the Primordians. Here, I have to say, this fight scene was awesome. And for a moment I wondered if that would be Viktor's VGU. As in, he would be somewhere in an egg, and the VGU would be one of these robots whom he would control. But nope, that is not what happened. Anyway, this scene ends with Jace and Mel defeating Viktor, which essentially ended their last chance at a diplomatic approach. So after his defeat, Viktor gave Singed the green light to combine Apex Hextech and Apex Shimmer. But before that happened, we got to the prison where Jinx was now. And here we got the scene that was just pure excellence. Simply said, Jinx's madness reached the pinnacle after Isha died. Because Isha was the last person who kept Jinx sane. And I don't really have anything to add to this scene. Whoever wrote this, cooked. But of course, eventually Vi comes in, she tries to free Jinx. In a way, Jinx appreciates that, but also she realized that everything was going wrong because she was still around. So she would take Silco's advice and she would just leave everything behind. By which, at that moment, she meant that she would end it all. So she punched Vi to surprise her, and she locked her in and left. Now, back in the council room, as Jace and Mel defeated the Primordian as two mages, the council had a meeting and they decided to unite and fight against Noxus, which was now a massive threat to the city, especially after they teamed up with Viktor. In this scene, we got an awesome compilation of everyone preparing for war, and yes, that one guy who is clearly a Piltover playing a piano is not Jin. That was confirmed, just so you know, even though that was obvious. But back in the prison, we get a quick parallel to Caitlyn getting Vi out of the prison once again, which is where that one scene happened. Now I will say they are in the middle of a war, so it's kind of funny they did it at that time. And again, I would like to point out that I watched that scene together with 4,000 people in the same room. And since these were people who bought tickets, they were the most dedicated fans of this universe. Which means those fans were very engaged in the relationships of the characters of this show. Long story short, I have never seen a crowd scream so hard for fictional characters. And that excitement went on for a while, because that was a long scene. But then we got to the final scene of episode 8. We got Mel confronting Mbessa. Here Mbessa confirmed that she was trying to use Viktor's army to destroy the Black Rose. And we got a scene where Singed injected Viktor into Warwick, fulfilling Singed's goal of combining Apex Shimmer and Apex Hextech. Now, why would he want to do that? Well, it was kinda teased that Miss Young was extracted kinda separately from the Black Ooze. So that is what saves his daughter. But anyway, during this experiment, Warwick and Viktor blended together. And finally, Vander died for real. Once again, overall, this episode is an easy 8 out of 10, with it only suffering from a slightly slower pace. Because again, it is mostly a setup for episode 9. And episode 9 is exactly where everything started paying off. It begins with Jinx being done with her past. Following the advice of Silco, the only way to end it all would be to just walk away from it. And so, quite literally, she burns down her past. Which leads to a stunningly good scene where Echo is now in a time loop. This was honestly just amazing. Him trying to convince Jinx to not blow herself up was something I did not expect. And it all made perfect sense. Because Echo spent an entire episode watching what could have been. This small scene was simply a massive payoff for an entire episode. And it was worth every second. After which the entire city was ready for war. And here we just got some excellent battle scenes. Though it was mostly a Noxian crossbows against Piltover rifles. Speaking of which, I loved how here we could see Caitlyn trying to snipe down Mbessa, only for her to absorb all the Hextech using the Rookern. That was the first time we could see these two characters clash on a battlefield, mastering their expertise. And while Piltover was trying to utilize all kinds of Hextech cannons, the Noxians brought out their shimmered hulks. I wonder if this was supposed to be a reference to the Grey Legion. But unfortunately, as the battle started going, we started losing characters. One of which was Loris. So he didn't do that much in Arcane after all. So next, Piltover goes in and they utilize the Grey. Fishy Boy was the one who was ready to deliver the explosive to take down Viktor, but it failed and by a miracle he still survived. And that is where we get to one of my favorite scenes in this entire show. We got Maddie's betrayal. Not only was this an excellent twist I did not expect, but also Maddie's death was one of the most satisfying scenes I've ever seen. She said the stingy line about her appreciating Caitlyn's warmth, but before we even had a chance to gasp, she shoots and instantly dies. It was so snappy, it was so fast, it was just an overwhelming scene. Pure cinema right there. But of course, Caitlyn was saved by Mel in this scene, which really started to set her up as a powerful character. But before we could get into that some more, Jinx and Echo now arrived on their own battleship, which does have an insane amount of details and Easter eggs all around. And from that point on, the show was just all-out war. We got Jinx with her new heavy machine gun. And once again, the battle sequences here were just amazing. But after that it was revealed that the Noxians were not actually defending Viktor the entire time. And instead, Viktor was sneaking into the Hex Core. Which is when we got to see him for the first time after the fusion. And yes, I know that the new Viktor's design is a hot topic right now. But I have to mention this. This design is one of the best body horrors I have ever seen. The humanity split with the uncanny mask, even though he is supposed to be a bit of a messiah. It does feel like a fallen angel that is there to evoke dread, even though he is supposed to help them all. From that perspective, this design is amazing. Sure, it is different from the Viktor we had before, But there is no shortage of excellence here. Anyway, this is where Viktor confronts Jace. And as he does, the Golden Army outside captures everyone. And among them we can even see Warwick, who is no longer Vander. It is just the apex of flesh and technology combined. So, slowly, the Primordians just take over the entire Piltover, but since Viktor made a deal with Ambessa, the Noxians are left alone, for now. And that is where we get yet another battle set up. This time it is Caitlyn and Mel versus Ambessa. At the same time, nearby, we also get Jinx, Echo and Vi fighting Warwick and the Primordian army, and the third battle is still Jace versus Viktor, where Viktor finally showed his Hex Claw. I am pretty sure in the end it is unrelated to the original invention. The first battle to be concluded is Ambessa versus Mel and Caitlyn. Here, Caitlyn loses her eye, but she takes down Ambessa's Rukern, which allows Mel to deliver her to the Black Rose. However, the twist here is, she only did this to lure the Black Rose out, so that she could take them down, which she did, but at the same time, she probably helped to take down her own mother too. Next, we got a really cool sequence with Vi and Jinx together, and they fought Warwick above the Hex Gate. And from below, Viktor and Jace fly out during their own battle. And now, there was a really awesome 4-way battle. Honestly, one of the best final battles we could have gotten. And of course, everything seems to go in Viktor's favor, as he simply captured everyone, but then Echo wakes up. And yes, I noticed that they also threw in the original weapons, which were originally supposed to be the hands of a clock tower. Which is where we get to the one part where Viktor wants to end all conflict by just joining everyone's mind. In a way, he would save humanity from itself. And that is where the big reveal comes in. Viktor captures Jace too, and the two have a confrontation. But they get interrupted by Echo. This is a big deal, because here, Viktor could see that someone else was also able to tap into the Arcane, even though it was a way smaller version of the anomaly. Which means Viktor was met with power that would be on his own level. And that is why Echo was able to damage him in the first place. Anyway, after seeing that even he has a weakness, and that he is not the only one who could ever ascend to that kind of power level, Jace really gets his Naruto and Sasuke moment, where Jace refuses to give up on him. And yes, this is where it was revealed that it was Viktor who saved Jace when he was just a child. And it was him who gave him Hextech. Because Viktor reached a power level so high, he realized only Viktor could stop Viktor. That is why this scene is so powerful. Viktor simply couldn't believe that he wanted to stop himself, because he was no longer on the path to help humanity. And so Viktor decides to end it all with the help of Jace. But that is still not the end, because the story of Jinx and Vi also got a conclusion. After Vi got a chance to finally be emotional again, it cost her Jinx's life. Now, is Jinx really dead? Honestly, I doubt it. And that's because in the last scene where Caitlyn was turned into a badass commander, we got a teaser that someone escaped through the ventilations. In fact, they even found Jinx's bomb, which means they were there. That would also mean they didn't find Jinx's body. And so when the show ends with the Zeppelin, that was the same Zeppelin that appeared at the very beginning of Arcane, which was the one Powder always wanted to ride. And so now, Jinx is likely using it to go into another region. Also yes, Singed likely created Orianna using Sky as the catalyst. But that is how Arcane ends. And that is where all the 8 out of 10s come into play. I realized that whenever in the past there was an episode with a little bit of a lower rating, it was all done so that this finale could be the best finale possible. And so of course, if you take everything into account, this is absolutely a 10 out of 10 experience. And honestly, I'm not even sure what else you expected. You see, after season 1, Arcane was my favorite show. And even now, after it concluded, it remains to be so. Yes, there are parts in the story where they could have taken a little bit more time. But every time that happened, The raw story connected to it was just so good, in the end, it simply didn't matter. It was just parts I wish would have been included in the story. For example, I would have loved to see how Echo convinced Jinx not to blow herself up, and how the two started crafting the warship. But for the purpose of delivering this story specifically, it wasn't really necessary. Which is why you will still see people giving this show 10 out of 10 despite some flaws. The story simply overpowers everything else. Which really means, if you see other people giving this show worse score, it is likely because they don't like where the story went. Especially if you don't like the time travel territory, that is a very niche topic. But unfortunately for me, that topic also adds a lot of hours into the details videos.